fatal heart impacts, past painful scars. In fact, I blast tasteful bars and pass. I back up my actions, fact don't ask, grab reactions, jacked attack with every word, then act with class as they hear me snap. I got nothing to lose, cause I fought and felt the bruise. Now I'm not the one confused, call the shots and they produce. I ain't lost, I'm finally loose. Pick a new silver excuse, I need the views to boost me to a new abuse of being used. Everybody wants a piece now, y'all can rest in peace now. You're dead to me, so peace out. Remember, you're discreet out. Get ready for defeat now.
Alrighty. Hello everybody. This is Kirusho here. And now, it is the last day of this godforsaken year. So, I was hoping to do a what if. And I was kinda surprised by this. Especially because one of the options on my community tab was not a what if Deku. But anyways, of the 700 of you who have voted, I want to say around 500 of you picked this one, since I believe it was at 67 to 7%. Now, with that being said, let us begin. We will not start with, well, Izuku being born. We actually do start sometime before then, with Hasashi. Now, instead of him being just some man who works an office job, he's actually quite different. He was very successful, and he went to college. Afterwards, he became a scientist, and was able to actually further down the line and quickly and briefly get into a department program with the military. Now, what this would mean for him is he already does have a very high-paying job, a high salary, and a plethora of resources at his disposal. And he himself also does possess a not super strength, an intelligence-based quirk. Now, along with this intelligence quirk, we do have Inko, who herself does possess no quirk. In fact, she is quirkless. And we do have her family. Her family is actually a very, very strong line of heroes. However, after she was quirkless, or born quirkless and it never manifested, she was abandoned. And she was actually put into an orphanage at a young age. Before, she eventually did grow up and leave, getting a job, and eventually one day, starting a family with Hisashi. Now, as for how these two met, I do want to say that whenever Hisashi was giving a meeting, he was going through a conference with a lot of people, he did actually leave. And him and Enko did somewhat run into each other. She herself did actually want to study to become a scientist, or at least get somewhat into the same line of work as Hisashi. Now, he basically helped her and showed her the proper things to do. And they did one day both end up in the same line of work. Inko was happy, and she owed a whole lot to him. Now, with that, Hisashi did actually ask her out to dinner one night. And the rest is history. The two hit it off well. And a couple years later, Midoriya would be born. Now, with Inko not knowing who her family is, she would not understand the quirk Midoriya is born with. Now, with that being said, Hisashi is actually there for Midoriya's birth, and he actually does help to deliver his son. Now, the very moment that this does happen, he does have a weird look come across his face, as he actually does hold his son in his arms, and hands him over to Inko, who is actually very shocked and surprised to see her baby boy. Now, she is happy, and she cannot wait to see him grow. Now, with that being said, Hasashi himself does begin to somewhat get unnerved. No one knows what he saw. However, this is not where things begin to go wrong. Hasashi gets brought into more programs and more teams in his line of work. And he's being pushed to the absolute limit with everything. And the stress is beginning to get to him. Now, with that, we do have Izuku, who does begin to grow up with his father. And Hasashi does eventually turn to alcoholism. Now, it is relatively calm at first. However, the more and more he begins to drink, the more and more he can see his son. His son is a very bright and intelligent young boy. Hasashi believes him to have his own quirk. However, he also does believe him to have Inko's family's ability. And it frightens him what that could actually turn into. He doesn't know what it was, but whenever that baby was born, he felt fear. Not the fear of something can hurt him, the fear of he can hurt somebody. Now, over these 4 years, Hasashi, he would have been breaking down and virtually losing his mind. I believe it was, as I have already stated, descending into alcoholism and, well, eventually, abuse. Now, there is the day that Midoriya's quirk manifest. And Hasashi, he comes home later on to the day, hearing about Izuku has a quirk, Izuku has a quirk. That's all he heard Inko ever talk about, that entire day. And he wanted to know. He wanted to test Midoriya's mental power. The boy is very intelligent. He didn't want Inko to tell him the boy's quirk. He wanted to come home and see for himself. However, he walked through the door, and he saw his son standing there, with one hand up in the air, and the couch in it, along with his mother just sitting down on it. And Midoriya is just happy and excited. Now, Hasashi was absolutely stunned. His boy has a super intelligence quirk, but he's currently lifting a whole lot of weight. That couch is pretty old, and it took 2 people to move it, full-grown adults. And his mother is sitting on it as well. That couch is a lot of weight. Hasashi basically screaming for Midoriya to put the couch down, to which he does. And Hasashi just goes on a straight tangent, screaming and yelling for Izuku about his quirk. What is it? And Inko, she actually just trying to get in between Hasashi and Midoriya, trying to explain that his quirk is just like her family's, and that the doctors are trying to understand what her family's quirk is. Then they can give Midoriya's a name. Now, she would actually then go on talking about it. Talking about how they believe whenever Midoriya is older, he might actually have a larger amount of power. And that frightens Hasashi. As Inko continues talking. Talking about how the doctors also do believe it to possibly be a transmutation quirk. Meaning that Midoriya will physically change in appearance. Now, this is all quite too much to take in at once. And Tasashi, he does try and actually grab Midoriya and try and ask him questions, try and get answers out of him, and learn about all this. Now, Inko does get in between these two once again, and she does actually smack Asashi or pull him away from their son. And he does actually get visibly angry. Now, these two do get into somewhat of a small fight. Midoriya basically running away, unsure of what to really even do. Now, ultimately this would be bad for Midoriya. As the next oncoming weeks, the abuse begins to get a bit more worse. Midoriya is eventually pulled out of school because too many questions are beginning to be asked. And we do have that one fated day. Midoriya is trying to get his father's approval. And he's actually answering a few questions his dad did actually tell him the other day. He wrote them all down. And he does actually present him with the answers. Hasashi looking over it and finding that they are all correct. Turning to look at his son, who does have somewhat of a smile. However, Hasashi can feel it. He can see it. There's something more behind Midoriya's eyes. His intelligence is telling him something, but even then he can't trust it. And he actually does go to smack Midoriya across the face. And Inko, she actually has come running in, from out of the kitchen, hearing Midoriya crying, as she once again goes to step in between Hasashi and her son. Now, Hasashi is trusting his gut. Everything his mind and body are telling him must be true. His son is going to turn into a monster whenever he is a full-grown adult. And he has to stop it. Now, he does go walking into the kitchen, Inko screaming and trying to calm Masashi down. As, whenever he does actually go to a drawer, he pulls a knife. And he goes to grab away to Zuko. Now, Inko, she actually does jump onto his back, and try to at least restrain him by his arms. Him simply just throwing her down onto a table, and breaking it. As Midoriya, he actually does go to run off. Now, Hasashi is able to grab his son, grabbing him by the back of his shirt and trying to force him down onto the ground. As he actually does go to wave the knife over his own head. Inko actually tackling him down and getting on top of him, trying to pin him down onto the ground. However, he's actually quickly able to flip her over and pierce the knife through her guts, or through her chest. As Midoriya just stands there, in absolute awe. And he begins to tear up and cry, as his full manifestation of his quirk does begin to appear in his mind. Now, Midoriya, his eyes do begin to glow green, and he simply just stares at his father. He can feel sadness and rage. And Hasashi, he actually has to go to stand up. However, with everything that's been going on in this large commotion, police were called. And they've already arrived, knocking on the door and trying to get any response back. And talking about how they heard screaming coming from this apartment. Eventually, after a minute or so of no response, they actually do open the door and walk in to see Midoriya, who is currently just hiding underneath the broken table, curled up into a ball. And then there is the scene inside the house. It's dirty, it smells like alcohol, things are broken, family photos are broken, and then there is a woman laying on the ground with a knife in her chest. And then there's another man in the room. The man simply just sitting there on his knees, looking up towards the sky, with a petrified look in his eyes, in pure fear. Meanwhile, there is also blood on his hands, and he is taken away, as they are able to match the prints on the knife to Hasashi's, and he is put in jail. Now, as for Midoriya, what happened inside this house? Nobody knows. Nobody can tell what happened this day. The police officers, they're just as confused. This man went crazy and murdered his wife, but his son survived? There's no logical explanation for this. If he just simply snapped, the kid should have died, right? That should be what have happened, but it wasn't. Now, Midoriya, he is actually taken away by police, and they do try and find any family that the boy might have. Now, they're not able to get into contact with Inko's family. However, they are able to talk to somebody close to the woman who died. Mitsuki Bakugo. Now, Mitsuki's daughter and Midoriya do go to the same school. They have talked before, and well, Mitsuki was trying to help convince Inko to leave Hisashi. And she does feel somewhat responsible for what happened. If she had simply helped Inko stand up to this man, the abuser, then she might have still been alive. And she actually does go through the process of talking to police and basically trying to at least talk about adopting or taking in Midoriya, since he's virtually forced to go to an orphanage otherwise. Now, Midoriya does spend a few days in the orphanage, as they get the paperwork all sorted out and somewhat finalized. And Midoriya, he has not spoken a single word since that day. They try and talk to him and get information out of him, and he doesn't speak a peep. In fact, he hasn't even tried to talk. He doesn't even write things down. And they all do jumble it up to a traumatic experience. The boy did watch his mother die after all. And his father, from what they can tell, physically abused him as well. So, the boy does need some time. And possibly he might just need to talk to some people. He might need to go into therapy and talk to a doctor. Now, with that being said, after Midoriya is settled into the Bakugo residence, we actually do have his friend. Bakugo, well, Katsuki. Now, we do actually have this conversation while they are in the middle of their recess at school. For Midoriya, he's simply just sitting down on a swing and replaying the events of that day in his mind, as we do have them from his point of view. All of a sudden, he was angry. All of a sudden, he was sad. He didn't know what to feel. He saw his mother die. Tears were streaming down his face. And he does remember it. And all that he remembers is a strange feeling. Before, he was just curled up in a ball underneath that table. And his father was frozen in fear. What did he do? Did he scare him? Is he a monster? Is there something wrong with him? His dad's always called him a monster before. But this is different. Isn't it? He's not a monster, is he? He's normal. He's just an innocent kid, right? I'm not a villain. I want to be a hero. These being the thoughts running through Midoriya's head. As Katsuki actually does sit down on the swing next to him and ask him if he's doing okay. Midoriya barely even shooting her a small glance, before going back to looking in front of him and pondering his thoughts. If there's anything he did inherit from his father, it was his intelligence, even if it wasn't a quirk. Now, she actually does go on talking about how she knows that Midoriya's been through a lot, but she does actually want to ask a few questions. And she does want to know a bit more about what happened. And that if Midoriya does want to talk, she is here. Plus, he does actually have a pretty, from what she's heard, strange quirk. Now, she does just go off talking and basically rambling, trying to get Midoriya to open up about subjects she knows he does like. Talking about pro heroes, All Might, and other things. And she actually does just keep talking and talking. Before we eventually do have what happens. Well, let's say a group of kids, 2 or 3, do actually walk up to them and ask them if they're even going to use the swings. As Katsuki, she actually does go on talking, saying that they're trying to have a conversation. Plus, her friend here has been through a lot, so to just leave them alone for right now. The kid's getting angry, and basically shouting that they just want to use the swings. If they're not even going to use them and just use them to sit down, then go over there and sit down somewhere. Just let them have fun. Now, she actually does stand up from off the swings, and you actually watch as she does actually begin to ignite sparks from her hands. Midoriya actually looking up to take notice to this. Her actually going on to say that she's trying to talk to her friend, and that she will protect him if she needs to. As she actually just hold up her hands and put them together, and with as much force as she can, she lets out a very small explosion. However, it was big enough to frighten these kids to run off. And Midoriya, he actually just look up to see a friend, as she does actually walk forwards, back over to him, and ask him if he's doing okay. Midoriya actually at least looking at her, and not even looking away, as he does actually somewhat nod. And she actually does ask Midoriya if he would like to talk about heroes more. To which he actually does go rumbling into his backpack and pull out his hero notebook, turning towards her and showing it to her. Her kind of confused, as he actually has someone just hand it over to her, and saying that this is what he has on heroes. Her kind of surprised that he actually spoke, as she begins to flip through it. And Midoriya, he's at least beginning to open up a bit, shyly talking about how All Might is a very strong hero and he does wonder what his quirk is. And then you do actually have Midoriya talking about more and more pro heroes. Endeavor, well, the number 3 hero, number 4, number 5, basically everyone in the top 10. However, Midoriya, whenever he is actually cut off by Katsuki, he does expect her to start screaming or yelling. However, she just says wow. And that this is actually a very, very good notebook, trying to encourage and help Midoriya, as he actually has someone smile. Now, with that, these two do head home, and Mitsuki can tell that Midoriya is in a whole lot better mood. Now then, with that being said, I do hope you guys enjoyed. Have an amazing night. I will catch you guys in the next part.